On November 6, 2018, an Instagram account titled Conversational Conservative was created. Sporting a profile picture of Jesus Christ wearing a MAGA hat, the account quickly gained traction. Now, obviously, this wasn't the only account on Instagram posting alt-right propaganda and memes. As the Dutch National Coordinator for Counterterrorism and Security explains in May of 2024, the 2016 US presidential election is considered the new beginning of the alt-right's online presence, with around 47% of accounts created around that time engaging with conservative media. Conversational Conservative posted a variety of content, ranging from memes making fun of Dolly Parton for her liberalism to advocating for immigrant genocide. Conversational Conservative was, in fact, only 15 years old, a second-generation immigrant, and autistic. He was me. At its height, the account had over 1,000 followers and attracted direct messages from a variety of people. Messages, like this one, offered me, a young person with autism, acceptance, while functionally indoctrinating me further into the alt-right. As researchers in the journal Autism and Adulthood note in their article, Neurodivergence and the Rabbit Hole of Extremism, although neurodivergence in isolation doesn't predict extreme ideologies, neurodivergent individuals prove more susceptible to extreme ideologies when facing marginalization by a neurotypical society. And yet, here I stand before you, not a member of the alt-right, leading us to ask, how did virtual communication with the conversational conservative prime neurodivergent acceptance of extreme ideologies? To answer, we can turn to Barath Ganesh's Weaponizing White Thymos, Flows of Rage in the Online Audiences of the Alt-Right, published in 2020. This model is ideal because it articulates the key elements Dr. Justine Egner found in her 2022 study, #ActuallyAutistic, where she found that autistic people often construct individual and collective identity narratives through online interaction. So today, let's examine Ganesh's model, apply it to my Instagram account, The Conversational Conservative, and finally, navigate implications. Ganesh defines thymos as our soul's desire for recognition of personal injustices. By adding the word white to thymos, white victimization thrives in online communities. Ganesh defines the adoption of white thymos through three tenets: visual documentation, racialized pride, and reinforcement of rage. First, visual documentation. The visual documentation, via whatever medium it occurs through, acts as evidence of white victimization. For example, Paul Nealon, a white supremacist who ran for Congress, shared a meme depicting Martin Luther's nailing of the 95 Theses. But in this case, the thesis reads, "It's okay to be white." The visual documentation via meme reveals the tropes of white victimhood and positions whites as victims of the political establishment. Second, racialized pride. Ganesh details how appeals to the white thymos reinforce racial pride, such as in the defense of white women. When conservative pundit Ann Coulter tweeted in reference to an attack on a white woman in Minneapolis, claiming the media sought to hide the ethnicity of the perpetrator due to political correctness, her tweet carried two consequences. It defended the narrative of white women being attacked by the media, and that only white men of the radical right, the enemies of political correctness, could save them. Finally, reinforcement of rage. Ganesh argues how racialized pride often constructs a perception of a loss of white entitlement. To the alt-right, the mythical dominance of Western civilization has collapsed due to equality. Ganesh details, conservative Paul Watson's videos deliver mile-a-minute lectures based on current events, which surround the ways in which liberals are betraying the people, implying the white majority as the only people that matter. Now that we've analyzed Ganesh's model, we can apply it to the direct messages I engaged with through my account, The Conversational Conservative. First, visual documentation. The visual documentation acts as evidence of white victimization. A majority of the posts shared by and with The Conversational Conservative were memes that pushed a harmful and problematic narrative. This visual documentation provided me with a greater sense of acceptance. This meme, while problematic, does a little to show any documentation. But his comment, by framing his message around how feminists were trying to attack us for being white, he was able to foster a sense of community, with us being at risk for our whiteness. Second, racialized pride. Ganesh explains how this racial pride unifies white men in a narrative of defense for white women. The Obedient Wives, an account I engaged with regularly, with their conversations surrounding how women simply need to understand that Christian conservative men only seek to protect them. Our conversations paint a narrative of white women being at the center of a culture war. Further conversations fuel the narrative of illegal immigrants targeting white women, and that only white Christian men, like myself, could save them. Finally, reinforcement of rage. Ganesh explains, reinforcement of rage creates a perception of a loss of white entitlement. The user in this message sought to protect me from cancellation, even saying that he'd show them what it means to be proud. My cancellation would have affirmed the idea of my whiteness being shunned or punished. My response only further primes my audience and myself for rage, directing our anger at those who would seek to cancel me. My account lasted for 3 years before my mother found it, and she wasn't happy, and rightfully so. Having analyzed Ganesh's model and applied it to my Instagram account, we can return to today's research question. How did virtual communication with the conversational conservative prime neurodivergent acceptance of extreme ideologies? The messages I was sending and receiving created a separation between what I knew and what I was saying. Internally, I didn't agree with what I was saying and on some level knew it was wrong. But the validation it gave me simply failed to connect with me. The world failed to give me what these communities did. Acceptance. The tension between my physical reality and my online persona leads us to two implications: neurodivergence in physical spaces and weaponized inclusivity. First, physical spaces need to account for neurodivergence. While the neurodivergent community may be accepted in the real world, online spaces are where we thrive. As Ledbetter and company found in their 2021 article titled Autistic Self-Advocacy in the Neurodiversity Movement, they found that autistic people are drawn to online communication due to it matching our communication strengths. They found that autistic people reported increased comfort, confidence, and ability to socially connect when interacting online compared to in-person interaction. Without a universal access of physical spaces accounting for neurodivergence, the growing trend is for autistic people to seek out online spaces, which may leave them vulnerable to dangerous ideologies. Next, weaponized inclusivity. Even when we find acceptance in the real world, we're still often faced with a sense of not truly belonging. As Welch and company found in their 2022 article titled Understanding the Term Weaponized Autism in an Alt-Right Social Media Platform, when users on Gab, an alt-right favorite, talk about accepting autistic people, they don't mean those who have been diagnosed or even meet the diagnostic criteria, but the hyper-intelligent, narrow-minded stereotype they've created to fulfill their ends. They feign acceptance, but their acceptance is the perceived exploitation of talents and vulnerabilities. Likewise, narratives of neurodivergence can and should be accepted, but can still feel a sense of otherness when it comes to their audience. Inclusivity for neurodivergence must meet our definitions, not those of the neurotypical. As the previously mentioned Autism in Adulthood noted, autism in isolation doesn't predict radicalization. It just means we're more susceptible to radicalization when it gives us what the real world fails to: acceptance and validation. Today, we examined Ganesh's model, applied it to my Instagram account, The Conversational Conservative, and finally, navigated implications. Fortunately, I am no longer a member of the alt-right, but the nature of my neurodivergence wasn't the key. It was acceptance and inclusivity in spaces, just like this.